Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 23, Text 10. Devahuti Ruvacha. Okay. Are you able to see this from here? You have phone. Okay, fine. Radham Badadvijavrishay Tadamogha Yoga. Okay. So, let's do it word by word. Radham Bata Dvijavrishaitad Amogha Yoga. Radham Bata Dvijavrishaitad Amogha Yoga. Mayadhipe Tvai Vibho Tad Avaimi Bhartaha. Mayadhipe Tvai Vibho Tad Avaimi Bhartaha. Yaste Abhyadhayi Samayaha Sakrud Angasango. Yaste Abhyadhayi Samayaha Sakrud Angasango. भूयाद् गरीयसी गुणः प्रसवः सतीनां भूयाद् गरीयसी गुणः प्रसवः सतीनां देवहूतिरुवाच राढम्बत द्विजवृषैतदमोघयोग मायाधिपे त्वयि विभो तदवैमि भर्तः यस्ते अभ्यधायि समयः सकृदङ्गसङ्गो भूयाद् गरीयसी गुणः प्रसवः सतीनां गुणः प्रसवः सतीनां देवहूतिरुवाच राधम्बत द्विजवृषैतदमोघयोग मायाधिपे त्वयि विभो तदवैमि भर्तः यस्ते अभ्यध्यायि समयः सकृदङ्गसङ्गो भूयाद् गरीयसी गुणः प्रसवः सतीनां Yes, would you like to recite? विभूतिरुवाच अधं विजद्विजयैतदमोघयोगः वैमि भर्तः अम्बसङ्गो यद्गरीयसी पुनः प्रसवः सतीनां Anyone else? Watch. Yoga. Ghariyasi. Yes. Devahutiruvacha Adam Dvija Prishaytadamogha Yoga Petai Satina. Okay, so word for word translation. Devahuti uvacha. Devahuti said, Radham, it has been achieved. But indeed, Dvijavarisha, O best of the Brahmanas, Etad, this, Amogha, infallible, Yoga Maya, of mystic powers, Adhipe, the master, Tvai, in you, Vibho, O great one, Tat, that, Avaimi, I know, Bhartaha, O husband, Yaha, that which, Te, by you, Abhyadhai, was given, Samayaha, promise, Sakrit, once, Anga Sangaha, bodily union. Bhuyat, maybe. Gariyasi, when very glorious. Gunaha, a great quality. Prasavaha, progeny. Satinam, of chaste women. Translation purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation, Sri Devahuti said, My dear husband, O best of Brahmanas, I know that you have achieved perfection and are the master of all infallible mystic powers because you are under the protection of Yogamaya, the transcendental nature. But you once made a promise that our bodily union should now fulfill, since children are great quality for a chaste woman who has a glorious husband. Purport. Devahuti expressed her happiness by uttering the word Bata, for she knew that her husband was in a highly elevated transcendental position and was under the shelter of Yogamaya. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, those who are great souls, Mahatmas, are not under the control of the material energy. The Supreme Lord has two energies, material and spiritual. The living entities are marginal energy. As marginal energy, a person may be under the control of the material energy or the spiritual energy, Yogamaya. Kardam Muni was a great soul and therefore he was under the spiritual energy, which means that he was directly connected with the Supreme Lord. The symptom of this is Krishna consciousness, constant engagement in devotional service. This was known to Devahuti, yet she was anxious to have a son by bodily union with the sage. She reminded her husband of his promise to her parents, I will remain only until the time of Devahuti's pregnancy. She reminded him that for a chaste woman to have a child by a great personality is most glorious. She wanted to be pregnant and she prayed for that. The word Stri means expansion. By bodily union of the husband and wife, their qualities are expanded. Children born of good parents are expansions of the parents' personal qualifications. Both Kardam Muni and Devahuti were spiritually enlightened. Therefore, she desired from the beginning that first she be pregnant and then she be empowered with the achievement of God's grace and love of God. For a woman, it is a great ambition to have a son of the same quality as a highly qualified husband. Since she had the opportunity to have Kardam Muni as her husband, she also desired to have a child by bodily union. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for coming today. And this morning we're discussing the pastime of Devahuti with Kardam Muni. And I'll speak on the topic of refining our understanding of seriousness in spiritual life. That's a broad topic. So the specific incident here is that Devahuti has served Kardam Muni faithfully, helping him in his austerities. And he is pleased with her, and now he seeks. Now she is making a request to him. Now, if we look at the broad context of this pastime, there are many extraordinary things in this pastime. First of all, we can say that We can look at it from a spiritual perspective, we can look at it from a material perspective. From a spiritual perspective, if we see, we say that Kardam Muni was such a spiritually advanced soul that when he had darshan of the Lord came before him and the tears of ecstasy came from his eyes. And then, if he had such love for God, we may feel, okay, then why does he have the desire for a companion? And even when we had a companion, he was not just gratifying his sense, he was continuing his austerities. So in one sense, what was the point of seeking to get married if he was just continuing doing what he was doing before that? And from the other perspective, you see, Swayambhuva Manu is an extremely powerful and prosperous king. And when he wants his daughter to be married, he would normally look for a worthy groom. And in the entire universe, he finds a sage who is quite renounced. And from one perspective, Devahuti is suddenly going to lose all her comforts. And her father happily puts her in that situation. Normally we may say, if there are some mundane romance stories. Now, if a girl falls in love with a boy who is not very wealthy and the girl is very wealthy, the father says, you will not be able to live without all these things. If you marry him, I will not give you any inheritance. And she says, I don't care. Love is like an infatuation at times. What is that saying? Love is blind, but marriage is an eye-opener. So, what that means is that sometimes the hormonal attraction blinds us to the complexities of life. But anyway, the normal situation would be that if there is a financially asymmetrical marriage, where one person is very wealthy and the other is quite poor, that generally happens because the two people are attracted to each other. But rather the father arranging for such a marriage for his daughter seems very unusual. And he does it. And then, the third remarkable thing is that Devahuti does not protest or resent at all. It's a complete shift for her. One moment she is living in prosperity in a palace, and she has maid servants taking care of everything for her. And the next moment, she is in a forest. And when she's in the forest, she's serving the sage. Nobody's serving her. Nobody's taking care of her needs. Rather, she has to take care of her husband's needs. And even after doing that, he doesn't seem to be in any way paying much attention to her. There is no description in the Bhagavatam of their wedding. It's interesting, in the entire Bhagavatam, before we come to the 10th canto, there is practically no description of any weddings. Weddings are really big things in Vedic culture, in general in human culture. But in Indian culture, especially modern Indian culture, they call the big fat Indian wedding. So there is, we had brought a group of some 25-30 Western yoga students, yoga teachers to India for a tour. And they wanted the India experience. So they went to Rishikesh, Vrindavan, other places. And then in Mumbai, there was a devotee young couple who were getting married. So they wanted to have that Indian wedding experience. So they went there for that. And after that, we were talking at the end of the tour. So what was your experience? So one of the young girls, she said that, that wedding was the most memorable experience. There were 700 people. He says, it was not just one day, it was, in the Western tradition, weddings is generally 2-3 hours ceremony. Here it goes on for days and days. There's something before the wedding, then there's something after that. Not just the wedding and the reception. There are multiple events. He says, after such a long and big wedding, she said that it's impossible to forget that you are married. So the idea is that people can just go to a court and just sign the papers and get married. But the idea, it's not just a legal event. It is a It is meant to be a not just certainly physical union. It's a psychological, spiritual, at various levels that connection has to be formed. And in some ways, the ambience, the environment, it brings certain gravitas to it. We may say there's so much opulence and so much wastage of money. Well, that's one way of looking at it. But all the rituals and the cultural dimensions that are there in the wedding, they bring a gravitas to it. But it's interesting, the Bhagavatam does not describe that how was their wedding performed. Just he hands over his daughter, Manu hands over his daughter to Devahuti to Kardam Muni, and then the life goes on. Certainly my wedding must have happened in some way, but there's no description of that. That means it's not a very fanciful wedding. Especially for a girl, her wedding is a big thing. Sometimes everything has to be like a dream wedding. This is to be like this, this is to be like this. So she doesn't get any of that. And yet there is no protesting, no resenting. She's just going on, doing everything. She's serving so diligently. So it seems, as I said, both from a material and a spiritual perspective, there seems to be a lot of unusual, questionable, strange things going on over here. And finally now, after she served diligently, Kardam Muni, in one sense, he's just, from one perspective you can say that he's just taking his wife for granted. He's just doing his austerities, doesn't even pay much attention to her. But then one day suddenly notices that she has become emaciated. And she's been serving him so diligently that she has not even been looking after herself physically. And he sees that, and it's like registers in him. Oh, she's been serving me so diligently. And then he desires to reward her. And when he desires to reward her, at this point, she is making this request. There are several verses going on over here. And here she is saying that I would like to have a child. So, if she is so renounced, if she could leave everything and she could just completely serve her husband and do all the austerities, then why is it that she is desiring a child? She could just perform spirituality. She's already doing it. And she could just go ahead and becomes perfect spiritually. So, sometimes we have very black and white understandings of spiritual and material. However, the reality is much more nuanced. Sometimes we think of spiritual and material as opposed to each other. To become spiritual, you have to give up the material. So, we often have this idea that it's almost like if we look at the first canto or Bhagavatam cover, we have the map of the material and spiritual worlds. So we also think that, okay, this is the spiritual world, and this is the material world, and that is the spiritual world. So it's like if you have a map of India, this is India, above that is China. Most Indians don't like spiritual world to be compared to China. But either way, the point is that we think this is geographically here, this is geographically there. But the point is, it's not that simple. The spiritual world does not just exist at another place. It exists at another level of reality. And so spiritual and material, they need to be demarcated, but their demarcation is not a neat geographical demarcation. This is the material world, that is the spiritual world. And even in terms of activities, it is not that it's very sweet, simple demarcation. This is a material activity and this is a spiritual activity. It's not that simple. So for Kardam Muni to desire to have a partner, or Devahuti to desire to have a child, these may by ordinary vision be considered to be material desires. But it's not that simple. Because ultimately, how do we define material and spiritual? There are two ways of defining it. The Bhagavad Gita has both these ways of defining. At the start, it defines by nature, by constitution. So matter is temporary, spirit is eternal. So we differentiate between matter and spirit by their nature. Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah. Ubhayor api drishtontas tvanayos tattvadarshibhi. Krishna says in 2:16 in the Bhagavad Gita that those who are seers, tattvadarshibhi, they see that there are two kinds of realities. There is that which endures, that which is enduring, which never ceases, and that which is temporary, which never endures. It's basically referring to the material and the spiritual. So this is differentiation. And in the initial part of the Gita, Krishna radically differentiates. Almost every attribute of matter, Krishna says that is not an attribute of spirit. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha. So matter is pierced by weapons. Matter is torn. Matter is burned by fire. Matter is withered and destroyed, dissolved by water. But none of these apply to spirit. So this is differentiation. And it's important. But as the Gita moves forward, it focuses not so much on differentiating matter and spirit based on their nature, but it focuses on not nature but purpose. Purpose means what is something being used for. Brahmarpanam brahmavir brahmagnau brahmanautam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. In 4:24 in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna uses this word Brahma many times. And many times when we hear this word, so much Brahma, we go into Brahma. What is this Brahma going on? And for many people in the monistic, the Advaitic tradition, actually this verse is their version of Mahaprasade Govinde prayer. Now when we take prasad, we chant Mahaprasade Govinda. They chant Brahma Arpanam Brahmavir. So food is Brahma, I am Brahma, Brahma is going into Brahman. That is their idea, what they are doing. So now what is Krishna saying over here? That actually everything is potentially spiritual. It depends on the purpose for which we are doing something. So if our purpose is to serve Krishna, or our purpose is to pursue spiritual reality, then everything can be seen spiritually. So Krishna tells Arjuna that just as when a yajna, in a fire sacrifice, say the oblations are being offered, is that material or spiritual? We could say the fire is material, the grains being offered are also material. But this whole process is meant for a higher purpose. And because it is meant for a higher purpose, therefore, it cannot be considered material. Brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. So Brahmarpanam Brahmavir. So in Brahma, Brahma is entered. So he says the fire is spiritual. Here Brahma is refers not to impersonal Brahman. It just refers to spirit. It just refers to spiritual reality. Aham Brahmasmi. That doesn't mean I'm an impersonal light. It means I am spiritual. So the fire is spiritual. What is offered in the fire is spiritual. The person offering it is also spiritual. And if their consciousness is spiritual, Brahma Karma Samadhina, if that person is in a Brahman consciousness, then Brahmaiva tena gantavyam. That person will attain Brahma. That person will attain a spiritual destination. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains in his commentary over there, that you can envision this battlefield also to be like a fire sacrifice, a yajna kunda. And here you are like the priest. And the Kauravas are like the oblations to be made into the fire. And your arrows are like the spoon by which the oblations will go into the fire. And in this way, if you do this in a mood of service, even your fighting is spiritual. So the idea is, Krishna later in the Gita says that matter and spirit don't have to be separated. They can be integrated based on our purpose. If our purpose is service, if our purpose is serving the Lord, loving the Lord, then, or in general, if our purpose is to pursue spiritual reality, then that, even material objects can be seen as spiritual. This, what Krishna says this in 4:24, he also echoes this several times in the Gita, most famously in 18:46, 47, 48. Those three verses he talks about how to work in this world. So he says, Yataha pravrittir bhutanam yena sarvamidam tatam swakarmana tam abhyarcha siddhim vendati manava. He says, swakarmana tam abhyarcha. By your work, worship the Lord. Sometimes some people translate this as work is worship. That is an oversimplification, because if you say work is worship, then what work? Is a beggar's work worship? Is a robber's work worship? Different people can have different kinds of work. No, it is not that work intrinsically is worship. Rather, work can be done in a mood of worship. And how is that possible? Krishna says that normally we may think that worship is done in the temple. Work is done in the office. Now, of course, work may be done at home also. We work from home nowadays. But we basically think of separate jurisdictions. This is the temple. This is where our worship is done. That is the workplace where work is done. But Krishna says it's not that simple. Because God does not exist only in the temple. God's jurisdiction extends everywhere. Yataha pravrittir bhutanam. From whom everything has come. Yena sarvam idam tatam. By whom everything is pervaded. So Krishna precedes these two lines before saying Swakarmana tamabhyarcha. By your work, worship Him. What it means is that God, it is from God everything has come. It is by God that everything is pervaded. Therefore, wherever you are working, that workplace can become your worship place. In the case of Arjuna, the battlefield can be a place where you can be worshipping the Lord. So the jurisdiction of devotion extends everywhere. In things which we normally call as spiritual, material, there also we can bring a spiritual consciousness. And if we act in spiritual consciousness, then what does spiritual consciousness mean? What is our purpose while we acting over there? Then even that can be spiritualized. So the Bhagavad Gita is spoken on a battlefield. And broadly speaking, it is spoken on a workplace. So Arjuna has basically what you can say a work crisis. How can I fight against my relatives? So the Gita focuses on work. But what applies for work can also apply for family. Just as Krishna's jurisdiction extends beyond the temple to the office, it also extends to the home. So when a couple desire to get married, when say Kardamuni, going back to the Kardamuni desires a partner. Now that doesn't have to be a material desire. It depends on purpose. If the purpose is to serve Krishna together, then even that desire is a spiritual desire. And each of us is a different individual. So somebody may say, if I get into a relationship, that will distract me from service to Krishna. Well, maybe not. Because we all have different needs. And if we have a need for relationships, if we have a need for intimacy, if that need is not fulfilled, then that will cause, that unfulfillment of that need will cause a distraction. That will cause trouble. And that trouble will prevent us from focusing on Krishna. If they get a biological level, if we consider, somebody is fasting. Now different people have different capacities to fast. If somebody decides, I'm going to fast Nirjal on Ekadashi, okay, without any water, that's good if you can. But if they are fasting and they're trying to chant the holy names, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, and then their lips are chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, and their mind is chanting water, food. If that's what is happening, well then better eat some food and then refocus on the holy name. The point is not to deprive the body. The point is to focus on Krishna. So for some people, food might be a distraction. And so just put that distraction aside and completely focus on Krishna. For others, the lack of food might be a distraction. So take some food and refocus on Krishna. So now I don't want to simplify or depersonalize relationships. Relationships is not just not like taking food. But the point is, we have different needs, just as we have need for food. And if everybody needs food at one level, but different people can fast at different levels. So we have physical needs, we have emotional needs, we have social needs. And if those needs are not taken care of, then that may cause us greater agitation. That may say, okay, now I don't have that responsibility, I don't have that distraction. Well, no, if the need is there, not having that will cause greater distraction. Because internally, the mind is always discontented, the mind is always dissatisfied, and it is lamenting. Many times in spiritual life, what we think of as a lack of taste in bhakti is often just the lack of a material need being fulfilled. That means somebody may say that I'm trying to chant, I'm just feeling so hungry, I have no taste for the holy name. Well, no, it's not that you don't have taste for the holy name, you just have a need for food. Take the food, after that you will focus on the holy name. Sometimes they're trying to chant and we're feeling sleepy. Well, if somebody slept at 12 o'clock and they're waking up at 4 o'clock and they're feeling sleepy and they say, I don't have taste for the holy name. No, it's not you don't have taste for the holy name. Your body needs sleep. We cannot deny the body's needs. If we don't sleep at the right time, we will sleep at the wrong time. It's as simple as that. So, we can't deny the body for too long. Now, austerity, tapasya is important, no doubt. But that is also to be done according to one's capacity. Oh, different people have different capacities, and there is no need to be embarrassed or ashamed if one's capacity for austerity is lesser than somebody else's. There are 6 opulences of Krishna, and one of them is renunciation. The others are, say, beauty, intelligence, wealth. So these come to us by our past karma. Some people may just be more wealthy than others. They're born in wealthy families, and maybe they have a higher paying job, and others do not. So a devotee does not have to feel guilty because they're earning less money and somebody else is earning more money. No, that's based on one's karma. So what applies to wealth, what applies to some people, maybe even among devotees, some devotees may be better looking than others. That beauty comes from past life. Similarly, renunciation also comes from past life. Now that doesn't mean renunciation only comes from past life. Even by our practice, disciplined practice, we can also develop detachment. But still the capacity for renunciation comes from our karma in the previous life. Just as our previous life's karma determines our looks, just as it determines our wealth, that is the wealth of the family in which we are born. Similarly, our previous life's karma determines our capacity for renunciation. Now, again, this is not to be used as an excuse. My past life's karma is such that I cannot do any renunciation right now. No. We shouldn't blame on the past life karma what we are not doing in our present life. We all have a capacity to perform austerity to some extent. But the point is that if different people have different needs, satisfying that need is not to be seen as material gratification. It is just a need that needs to be taken care of so that one can focus on Krishna. So Kardam Muni, he did not need a partner for in this case, physical gratification. But still he sought because he wanted an assistant. He wanted somebody who he could connect with at various other levels. So was it a material desire? What is a spiritual desire? You don't have to get into that analysis too much. Was it, rather than focusing on what is material and what is spiritual, we can focus on what is anukul and what is pratikul. What is favorable and what is unfavorable. So, if taking care of a particular need, like if I'm fasting, I take some food and then I start focusing on my chanting, my studying, my seva, well, that may be favorable. I may be able to do better service. My consciousness will be better available to Krishna if my consciousness is not consumed by thoughts of food. Now that doesn't mean that I can just keep eating like a pig. Then my consciousness gets consumed by the thoughts of food. That's why Krishna says yukta. Yukta means regulated. Natya ashnatastu yogosti nachaikanta manashnataha. Not eating too much, not eating too little. Now how do we know what is too much and what is too little? Well, we know. There's a simple experience. Generally, after eating food, If we feel so, generally because of lack of food, we feel lack of energy. And we need food to get energy. But sometimes because of food, we feel lack of energy. So, if we are eating so much, that after that, instead of getting some energy, we feel, oh, I just have to sleep for 6 hours now. Well, that is clearly extra. So, the idea is that neither too much nor too little. So, for Kardam Muni, it was not a material desire. He continued his service, he expanded his service, and of course, eventually we see that Lord Kapil Dev will appear. But if we focus on that aspect only, that in this Kapil Dev is going to appear, and that's why it is transcendental, then that means none of this can be in any way spiritual for us. Because through our relationships, it's unlikely that the incarnation of the Lord is going to appear. Krishna can do anything, but it's unlikely. So let's not focus on the end result and therefore call it spiritual. That is true. That's one way of looking at it. But look at the context, look at the consciousness also. Now, as far as Devahuti is concerned, so Kardam Muni has shown his spiritual seriousness earlier by being completely devoted to the Lord. So devoted that the Lord himself comes and gives him darshan. And the Lord tells him that I have arranged a good wife for you. Mm-hmm. And then Swayambhu Manu comes, inspired by the Lord, to offer his daughter Devahuti to Kardam Muni. And then on the other hand, Devahuti has also shown her spiritual seriousness by serving her husband diligently. As I said, without resenting, without complaining. There are two very, very difficult things to do. If suddenly from a very comfortable situation, we are put in a very uncomfortable situation. So it's not easy to do that. But she's done that. She's shown her devotion, and not just her devotion to her husband, but ultimately she understands life is meant for a spiritual purpose. How was she able to accept all this? The sudden move from comfort to discomfort. Why would her husband why would her father get her married to a man who has no material prospects? He has no material possessions right now and no material prospects also. He's not materially ambitious at all. Because her father was also spiritually minded. They both were serious about spiritual life. So she was able to accept the situation. But just because she is spiritually serious does not mean that she should not have any desire for a child. That is a misunderstanding of what spiritual seriousness means. For different people, spiritual seriousness may need to be defined differently. For somebody, you fast Nirjal on Ekadashi, that's your spiritual seriousness. But for somebody else, that may not be the criteria. For somebody else, it may be that actually, yes, you need to take food, but after taking food, what are you doing? Sometimes some of us may take no food. And then instead of focusing on Krishna, we are focusing on who is eating how much food. Yes, such a sense gratifier. Attached person, shameless. Then, our body may be fasting, but actually our ego is feasting. Our ego is feasting, and because our ego is feasting, we can say our soul is fasting. The soul is nourished by remembrance of Krishna. But if all that we are remembering is how fallen everyone else is and how great I am, then we may be feeding our ego, but we are starving our soul. We are not remembering Krishna. So for different people, spiritual seriousness may need to be defined differently. And in this case, we see that although she has a desire for a child, that desire is not to be seen as a material desire. Because that desire is not distracting her from her service to Krishna. So, service to her husband, and together they are serving Krishna. And we see after this what happens. This pastime can sometimes get even more bewildering. That after this what happens is that Kardam Muni says, yes, I'll fulfill your desire. But both of them they are living in such a sattvic, sagely environment that physical desire just doesn't get stimulated. And when they see that, when Kardam Muni sees that, what does he do? he uses his mystic power. In this particular verse, is described that Yoga Maya. That now Yoga Maya can mean two things. Prabhupada says this, Yoga Maya is under shelter of the divine energy. But a Yoga Maya, also in the context of the verse, can mean that he has the powers that are seen as Maya by some. But by his practice of yoga, he has mystic powers. Mystic powers are seen as Maya by some. So then what is done over there? Actually, he creates a beautiful palace. He arranges for many, many maid servants to be there. For Devahuti to be bathed, to be decorated, to be adorned. And through that, an ambience is created which will facilitate the fulfillment of that desire. So we may say, oh, this is just, if we look at those descriptions, it may seem, both of them were so austere, performing such austerities, and now they have an opulence and they are now just gratifying their senses. Or it may seem that Kardam Muni is just pandering to the desires of Devahuti. Well, if those were the desires, if it were that simple, if Devahuti had such desires so strongly, she could very well have refused her father's instruction. He said, you may marry him. If all that she was desiring was royal opulence and royal comforts, then why would she even get married to Kardam Muni? So it was not that Kardam Muni was pandering to her desires or Devahuti was craving for such comfort. Rather, everything requires a particular environment. So, when the description of the opulence is given, we may think, oh, this is just material, this is distraction. No, it's not material. What is meant for a spiritual purpose requires a needs to be done properly. And doing it properly means it requires a proper environment. We see that when Drona was teaching archery to his students. Now all his students, he'll put them in a line and he wanted to test their archery skill. And then he had a effigy of a bird put on a top of a tree and he said, you have to shoot the eye of the bird. And when he was saying that, when he told to set that target, he told his students one by one to come. Yes, what do you see? I see the forest. And then I see the tree. Okay, move aside. He said, okay, what do you see? I see just the tree. Okay, move aside. What do you see? I see the branch. Move aside. What do you see? I see the twig on which the bird is there. Move aside. He told everybody to move aside till Arjuna came forward. And he asked Arjuna, what do you see? He said, I just see just the eye of the bird. I see only what I have to shoot. And Drona was pleased. Drona said, shoot. And he shot and he pierced the effigy bird's eye. Now the significant point here is, when Arjuna asked, what do you see? Arjuna didn't say, I see Krishna everywhere. He didn't see that. Why? Because if he is to be an archer, he has to do archery. And for doing archery, he needs the appropriate inner focus. Yeah, you can be remembering Krishna in terms of the purpose of your life. But when there is a serious work to be done in archery, it is not. Nowadays people play archery, it's a sports. It's for entertainment. But warriors, when they're practicing archery, it is not for sports. It is a matter of life and death. And when he is focused on that, he has to have the appropriate inner focus. Now suppose we have a heart attack and a heart surgery is required. Now, say that the heart surgeon is a devotee. Now, would we want that heart surgeon to be chanting Hare Krishna and focusing on chanting Hare Krishna while doing the surgery? Or focus on doing the surgery? What do you think? Yeah, maybe if we are fed up with life and we want to die, you can tell. So you chant Hare Krishna. But heart surgery is a serious business. And for that serious business, serious focus is required. So yes, that heart surgeon is a devotee, that's good. And the devotion is seen not necessarily in the external action of chanting the holy names. It is seen in the purpose why that person is a doctor, why that person is performing surgery. So that inner purpose is more important than the outer action. Now, in the appropriate environment, if that person comes to a temple, yeah, they're openly, loudly chanting Hare Krishna. But in the operation theater, they focus on the surgery. So similarly, we need to focus on what we are doing and have the appropriate environment for that. So I remember there was one, I do these monks podcasts with various senior devotees, where I invite the senior devotees for having discussions, discuss various topics. So we discuss some things, and after that also, after the podcast also, which we do recording, we have some other discussions. So there's one prominent sannyasi guru in our movement with whom I was having a discussion, and he gave this example of how once one devotee was driving him, and while driving him, that devotee was constantly chanting. And then he was constantly chanting, and he took several, but twice he took a wrong turn. Once he just kept the red signal turned to green, but he didn't move forward. Other time it was the green signal, but still he stopped. And there he said, I was wondering, is he a bad driver or what is happening? So he asked him, we are missing a lot of this. He says, Maharaj, you are here. I want to be in spiritual consciousness. So I am constantly chanting. And that is distracting me from my driving. And he said, your service here is not chanting. Your service here is driving. Isn't it? And spiritual consciousness means do the service of driving as well as you can. If you can remember Krishna in the background, it is fine. But there is a primary service and there is a secondary service. So yes, there is a time for chanting, we focus on chanting at that time. But when we are doing other services or other activities, you think that if I am not chanting, then it is a material activity. That itself is material consciousness. If we are doing a service for Krishna, for Krishna's devotee, then there doesn't have to be an external ornament to proclaim to the world that this is spiritual. It is the very context of the service, the intention why we are doing that. That is what makes it spiritual. So that's why for different people, what is spiritual and what is material, that we cannot have an absolute criteria. That, if somebody is doing this, this is material. If somebody is doing this is spiritual. Who knows? It depends on time, place, circumstance. I'll quickly conclude 2 examples to illustrate this point. That what is spiritual and what is material is not so simple to understand. These are 2 incidents from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. We have that there was this devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who lived in great opulence. And when Mahaprabhu's servants, Govinda and others, went to meet him, he was living in a big palace and he had servants all around him fanning him, and he was eating betel nut. And he seemed to be like just a wealthy zamindar, a very wealthy landlord. And they thought that what kind of devotee is he? That is Pundarikaksha Govinda. So they said, what kind of devotee? That's what they were thinking. But then the devotee started chanting, Aho Bakiyam Sisthan Kala Kupam. That, they chanted the glories of Krishna, how he delivered even Putana. And this great devotee, Pundarik Vidyanidhi, what happened to him was, just fell down in ecstasy. And the devotees who had come, we have heard this verse so many times, it has no effect on us. But for him, there's such a great effect. So what is happening was, he was born in a wealthy family, he was an influential person in society. So he was living according to the way that was expected for him in his family and his social situation. But his heart was with Krishna. So conversely, there was, when Haridas Thakur was in Mayapur, sometimes he would go into ecstasy and start dancing. So sometimes the snake charmer would come and he would play, he would start singing music, and Haridas Thakur would go into ecstasy with that music. When appropriate music was going on, like Krishna dancing on Kaliya, he would go into that kind of mood. And once another person came and he started dancing and rolling down ecstasy and going to ecstasy. The snake charmer just took his stick and started beating that person. That person started screaming and went away. So that person was apparently having tears of ecstasy in his eyes. But he was just doing it for show. Just doing it for show. So the externals were there, but the internals were not there. Bhakti Thakur said, what is the price of tears of love of God? He said, it is just the price of onion. You just get the onion, put it in your eyes, tears of God, tears will come out. And if you are around gullible people, they'll say, oh, you are in ecstasy, that's why you're getting tears. No, you can be sitting in a kirtan, just have some money in your pocket, take it out, put it in your eyes, and tears will come. Isn't it? So, we can't just decide based on external or internal, just simply on external, this is spiritual, this is not spiritual. This does not mean the externals are not important. Certainly, at the appropriate time, we need to come in spiritual externals. We need to do direct devotional activities. And we need to do them in adequate quantity so that we are internally connected with Krishna. But after that, we need to carry that internal connection in all the activities of our life. And in that way, spiritual seriousness will be seen not so much just by the external action, but by the internal intention. So I'll summarize. I spoke 3 main points today. The topic broadly was redefining our understanding of spiritual seriousness. So we started by talking about how this pastime can seem very bewildering in terms of why would Kardam want to marry at all if he's so spiritually serious? Or why would Devahuti want a child if she's so spiritually serious? And then we discussed how that when we talk about spiritual and material, the Gita first differentiates the two of them. At first, matter and spirit are separate, but then in terms of nature, they are separate. But in terms of purpose, they can be united. And that union is how most of the times we function in life. So what is material and spiritual is to be seen based on the purpose for which one is doing an activity. So a fire sacrifice can be seen as being made of material elements, but it is for a spiritual purpose, then it is spiritual. If fighting in a war is being done for a spiritual purpose, then it is to be considered spiritual. So considering that purpose, then we discuss how even Kardam Muni's desire and Devahuti's desire, they are spiritual desires. So different people, based on their past karma, based on the kind of body mind machine they have, may have different kinds of needs. And taking care of those needs is not the same as pandering to one's senses. For some people, taking care of those needs may distract them from spirituality. For others, not taking care of those needs may distract them from spirituality. So rather than simply labeling this activity as material and that as spiritual, you can say that we focus on what is favorable and what is unfavorable. And for different people, what is favorable and unfavorable may vary. But focus is on how much one is steadily wanting to connect with Krishna. And we discussed how Pundarik Vidyanidhi and this imitator ecstatic person, their examples show more important than the externals are the internals. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, please.
You mentioned about the capacity of individual, and in this context we have the desire of devotee. What is the correlation between the capacity, the desire of devotee in this context to the swadharma you mentioned from the 18th chapter?
Yeah. Okay. So what is the correlation between capacity, desire and swadharma? No, I'm not talking about a direct correlation. See, I was talking about two things over here. That there is the spiritual side of the individual where we just need to connect with Krishna. And that's what will satisfy the soul. However, the soul presently is in a body-mind machine. And in this machine, there are different needs which need to be taken care of. So one is, we could say, our varna